Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Careful for Spoilers. I am your host James Barnes, and today guys I'm joined once again by Brad and Blake, and we're going to be talking about the original, the OG Star Wars series and Rogue One. I've been waiting a long time to talk about these movies on the podcast, and this is the perfect time with the Rise of Skywalker and unfortunately all of the controversy surrounding this film, whether it's good, whether it's a satisfying ending to the Skywalker saga, but we're going to talk about that on another podcast. This is all about the trilogy that started it all: A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and of course Rogue One. And before we dive into those movies, I want to know, what does Star Wars mean to you guys? Like, after seeing the original trilogy, what do these movies mean to you guys in cinema, in fandom? Like, what do they mean to you guys?
Well, my earliest memory that I can recall actually has to do with Star Wars. I was being watched by my babysitter and they turned on Return of the Jedi. It was during the speeder bike scene, and I remember being like, what is this? And then very shortly after, I got the original trilogy box set on VHS that had the special editions in it. And so Star Wars is responsible for my love of film, I think. They had the little making of features on those VHSs, and that made me love filmmaking. So Star Wars, I wouldn't be on this podcast right now if it wasn't for Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars is everything to me. My earliest memories, like Bradley was saying, are Star Wars related. I can remember watching the Battle of Hoth over and over again, playing lightsaber battles with my friends in the backyard, getting the whole neighborhood together and playing Battlefront together. It's just, it's all Star Wars. I have it permanently on my body. Half of the clothing that I own is all Star Wars related. Like, it's the reason I love movies.
Yeah, it's the same thing for me. Like, Star Wars changed how I view film. It changed everything for me. I have a bunch of Star Wars games. I remember the first time I played Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Mm-hmm. It was one of my favorite games ever for Nintendo 64. I used to play it for hours, for days on end. Like, I used to look forward to summers where I could just play that game forever. And I've been playing most of all the Star Wars games ever since. I love these movies. It's why I love sci-fi fantasy, these space battles, the Force, the lightsabers, everything that Star Wars has introduced into fandom, into movies, is why I like Star Wars. So let's dive into the film that pretty much leads into the events of A New Hope. Let's talk about Rogue One. And Brad, I want to start with you. Give me some of your positives for Rogue One and tell me why it's just such an awesome film.
So Rogue One is my second favorite Star Wars film. My likes are pretty much the entire movie. I think that every character is interesting, especially K2SO and Chirrut Imwe. They're my favorites in the movie. Mads Mikkelsen's one of my favorite actors, so getting him into Star Wars is just completely welcome, in my opinion. Same with Ben Mendelsohn, Donnie Yen, all of these just amazing caliber actors that they got to be in this film. Felicity Jones is great as Jyn Erso. All the performances in this movie are great. I can't wait for the Cassian and K2SO TV series that they're doing on Disney+. The humor is great in it, especially K2. He's hilarious. Getting Tarkin back is amazing, and he looks fantastic. It's the effect still holds up. The Scarif battle is just one of the best battles in all of Star Wars. I think it's only second to Battle of Hoth. I love that it's the only Star Wars movie that really feels like a war film and kind of a spy movie rolled in there too. It's both at the same time, and I love that we got to see this new angle of Star Wars this time. There is nothing better than whenever Vader just starts wrecking shit at the end of this movie. It is hands down my favorite Vader moment in any of the Star Wars movies. It just shows that power that he has, and whenever he loses control, just destroys all of those Rebel Alliance members. I love the way that it seamlessly just goes into the very beginning of A New Hope. It's pretty much, you can turn off Rogue One and turn on A New Hope, and it's right where you left off. I love this movie so much.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I like about it the most. The fact that you can watch Rogue One and just go directly into A New Hope. It's all linear. It all makes sense. And it just shows that the sacrifices that rebels make, the sacrifices that anyone makes, it's more than just being Jedi. It's more than just being able to use the Force. There are other heroes who sacrifice their lives, who put everything on the line, and that's why I love Rogue One. I think the cinematography is incredible. The visual effects, some of my favorite in any Star Wars movie. It's just absolutely incredible. You mentioned it, all of the scenes on Scarif. It's the last 50 minutes of this movie, and it's all amazing. It goes by so fast. I believe the entire runtime is like 2.5 hours, and it just flies by. It's just incredible. The humor with K2SO is awesome. I love Jin. I love Cassian. Everyone in this movie. I love Donnie Yen. Him and Baz. They're just awesome. Everyone in this movie is just awesome. I know they don't exactly have like any future purpose, and I like the way that they went out fighting in Rogue One, but I kind of wish that I got to see more of these characters, but they serve their purpose. Everything about this movie is awesome. This is the best use of the Death Star in any Star Wars movie, period. Even with Starkiller Base, I think how they portrayed the Death Star in Rogue One is incredible. When it hits, I forgot what planet that because it's the planet that Saw Gerrera's on, but when it destroys it, it moves into the path of the sun, and it becomes this like eclipse, and then it just destroys this entire planet. It's like, oh shit, this is the weapon that will destroy all life that doesn't serve the Empire. Anyone who gets in their way will just die from this Death Star, and I love the Death Star. I think it is the ultimate killing weapon. Like you already said, the Darth Vader sequence at the end is just the best thing we've ever seen from Vader in the movies. It's incredible, everything about it, the score, the way he just mows them down with his lightsaber using the Force. This is an incredible film. This is definitely top 3 Star Wars movies for me. I absolutely love Rogue One. So Blake, I'm going to pass it off to you. Give me your positives for Rogue One.
So this is also in my top 3 Star Wars movies. It's actually my second favorite, just like it is with Bradley. I love that this movie feels to me like the promise of the books that we read whenever we were younger, or that I read at least, the video games we played, Battlefront, the boots on the ground stuff. That's where this movie shines the most. Is it's showing these people that aren't Jedi but that believe in the Force, and that's one of my favorite. That's one of my highlights of the movie. Is I'm one with the Force and the Force is with me. You see really good uses of the Force in this movie. I also love the scale of this movie. Everything seems so much bigger. You understand. You feel how big the Death Star is in this movie. You feel how big the walkers are in this movie. You feel how big the ships are. The Battle of Scarif, I think, is the greatest battle in all of Star Wars. The last 30 minutes of this movie is some of the best that's ever been in Star Wars. I think it's the best looking Star Wars movie, just like you were saying with the effects, the cinematography. It looks fantastic. I think the biggest strength to this movie for me is it does the impossible, which is it improves the original Star Wars. It makes A New Hope a better movie, and that's fucking impossible. It's an almost perfect movie. It's one of the best movies of all time, and this movie makes it a better movie. It makes you feel the importance of destroying the Death Star. It makes the impossibility of the rebels being able to defeat the Empire. It makes it that much greater, and you feel all of it in this movie. Another thing about this movie, the more you watch it, the better it gets, at least for me. I think that you realize more of the character development, the subtle moments, the acting choices. It's one of the best acted Star Wars movies, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
I adore this movie.
Yeah, most definitely. But not every moment is perfect. I do have like 1 or 2 very, very small negatives. And Brad, I want to start with you if you have any. Let me get your negatives from Rogue One.
So there are very few problems I have with this movie. One of them is not every single joke lands. That can be said for pretty much any movie, though. I can't think of a single movie that every single joke that they throw out there is funny. Even in the Marvel movies, sometimes they land flat. I think that the music isn't as iconic as the other Star Wars movies. I like the Rogue One theme.
Yeah.
It's really good, but I couldn't really pick out another piece of music off the top of my head from that movie that I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really good one. The CG on Leia at the end isn't the best. But that's really all the negatives I have. And if that's all the negatives I've had, that's a damn good movie.
Yeah, I only have... I can barely call them negatives, though. They're very small nitpicks. Like, the Leia thing, it's like, it doesn't work. Also, the Tarkin CGI, it doesn't work for me, honestly. I think around the mouth, because it's actually like a completely different human, and they're just putting someone else's face on them. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't really match up, and I think, like, around, like, the neck, it just looks really weird. But I mean, that's just, it is what it is. The technology has gotten better since then, and it doesn't distract me as much as it's distracted other people that just bitch up a storm because they don't like how Tarkin looks. The other thing I have a negative with is, I feel like this is just a Star Wars thing where there's just like random weird aliens just for no reason, really. It's where Saw Gerrera is interrogating, I can't remember his name, but he's interrogating the defector, the pilot, and he has that weird alien that does the interrogation. I'm like,
it's called like what, the
Bugalit?
Yeah,
Bugalit, something like that.
Something. It's so stupid. The way he says it is stupid. I just hate it. I felt like they could have maybe chosen a different way to interrogate him or to get the truth, if you will. But there's stuff in like The Force Awakens. Like I said, there's stuff in all Star Wars movies where there's just this one random alien that I just don't get, and is just in there to be weird. But that's really it. I don't really have any negatives really in Rogue One. Is just very small nitpicks, because I think this film is so tight. It's beautiful. It's just, everything's been said about Rogue One. But Blake, do you have any negatives?
It's really just the Bugalit thing. It's just weird. It doesn't really like fit within the movie. It's such a strange part to the tone of it. I don't know if it's supposed to be funny or if it's supposed to not be funny or if it's supposed to be torture. Like, it's just very strange, and it's just like 4 minutes in the movie, and then it's like they never go back to that tone or even touch that again. So it's fine.
Yeah, I feel like Rogue One and the original trilogy, I found myself not having that many negatives. There's so many positives with these 4 films. Like, there's such incredible films. But before we move on to A New Hope, did you guys have any final thoughts on Rogue One before we move on? I want to make sure we capture everything.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this movie is like, it's an almost impossible movie. It's another Star Wars prequel, so right there, you're running the risk of ruining something that's great. It leads directly into the end of it, is the beginning of the most beloved movie of all time, arguably. So it's such a risky movie, and the movie builds and builds and builds to this incredible climax. Just like Gareth Edwards. That's his name, Gareth Edwards?
Yeah, the director, yeah.
Gareth Edwards, just like he did with Godzilla in 2014. His movies do a really good job of just building and building to this amazing climax, and that's what this movie is to me. It builds to an amazing climax, and it made A New Hope a better movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. It elevates the source material, and not a lot of prequels can say that.
Yeah, they made this movie for $200 million and made $1 billion. That's incredibly profitable. I've seen like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Their budgets are insane. They're like $350. Endgame was like $350, around that range. And Rogue One was done for $200 million, and it looks incredible. It's one of the most visually stunning movies I've ever seen. It's an incredible achievement for everyone involved. So let's move on to A New Hope. I find myself loving this movie more and more every time I see it. Every time I think that my ranking of these movies is set, I see A New Hope, I see Return of the Jedi, and I'm like, I don't know. I might have to switch a few things around when I talk about my rankings. So, Brad, again, let's start with you. Let me get your positives for A New Hope.
So this is the one that started it all. Every character in this movie is interesting, down to the characters that are only in the movie for a couple of seconds, like Greedo. Like, every character is interesting. And everything that the movie introduces, the Force, lightsabers, the dark side, the light side, everything that makes Star Wars great, the Empire, everything about it is just, it's iconic and it's brilliant. The effects are still amazing, and they stand the test of time. It's crazy to think that this movie came out so long ago, and it still holds up today. I mean, sadly, we only have the updated versions of the movies available to watch, but even then, the effects that they didn't mess around with still hold up. I think that the fact that this movie gave us Harrison Ford as an actor. I know this wasn't his debut, but this was his big break. So the fact that it gave us him is something that is just a boon to all movies of all time that he's ever been involved in. Except for that Call of the Wild that's coming up. I'm iffy on that one. I don't know what Harrison Ford was thinking on that. The scene where Han is pretending to be a stormtrooper over the comm system is absolutely hilarious. It's funny every single time I see it. I think that it's one of those moments of levity that's so needed in that super intense sequence, and then he just comes in with the we're fine, how are you? it's so good. It gave us Vader, arguably the greatest movie villain of all time, and there's just everything that this movie gave us I'm so thankful for. And there are very, very few complaints that I have with this movie. Just like you were saying, it gets better every time I see it. Every time I see Rogue One, A New Hope gets better. They work so symbiotically like that. But yeah, I love A New Hope. It's one of those that did move up on my list from what I initially had when I was ranking these after seeing Rise of Skywalker. Going back and revisiting scenes from A New Hope, I was like, God damn, I got to move this movie up. It's so good.
Yeah, it's a really, really good movie. I think this has a great opening. I wish I was there the first time this movie came out so I can just experience this. Hear the John Williams score for the first time you see that Star Destroyer coming into frame. The relationship between R2 and C-3PO, mm-hmm. I think they have such a great relationship. Instantly, you feel like these two droids have been through shit together. The relationship between Han and Chewie. Carrie Fisher is amazing in this movie as Leia. She's so strong, she's so powerful, she's willing to get it done. She's not the quote-unquote princess you would think of that needs to be saved. She can do it herself. Mm-hmm. Luke is not necessarily my favorite in this movie. Like Rey, I've noticed that I need time to grow with these characters, and Luke really wasn't doing it for me completely in this film. Obi-Wan Kenobi, what a great character. Again, instantly you feel this history with him, with the Jedi, the Sith, everything that he's telling Luke about the Force. And there's this really, it's a very simple scene, but it's a scene with Luke, and he's talking to his Uncle Ben and his aunt, and he's talking about his dad, and you can see this look that they give each other because they know who his dad is and everything that happened with that. Like, there's so much in this movie that literally just sets the stage for everything that comes after and before. You know, it's interesting to watch the original trilogy and then go back and watch the prequels. I prefer to watch it that way instead of chronologically because I feel like it adds something to it. I don't know. That's just me. But everything in this movie works. There's very, very small nitpicks that I have. I will get into that in a second. So Blake, I'm going to pass it off to you.
So the score, just for a second, the score. This is what it's all about. This is Star Wars. Star Wars is just as much about John Williams and the score as it is about anything else. And that's immediately what jumps out to me about this movie as one of the strongest moments. That and Harrison Ford's introduction. He's so badass. He's just chilling in the cantina with Chewbacca. He's so cool. Harrison Ford's the coolest man who ever lived. I think that even what you were saying, even the things that George Lucas added, like the effects for me still hold up. Even some of the things that he added, I still defend. I still think that they're great additions. It kind of fleshes the world out more and adds more characters to it. And I still think those effects look pretty good, especially on Disney Plus. The Disney Plus remaster that they've done, it looks stunning. It looks better than it looks on Blu-ray somehow. Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan obviously is incredible. All of the mystery around that character, and you immediately want to know more about his backstory, and he feels like an old samurai in the day that the samurai has been gone, you know, and you want to know about his past and what's going on there. Vader, his look, the music that comes on, his character introduction, everyone's character introduction, I think is fantastic. Luke, even though I don't love him in this movie, his character introduction of looking up at the star, looking up at the sunsets, just it's beautiful. This whole movie is fantastic. The final space battle on the Death Star is one of the best space battles, if not the best space battle in sci-fi history. It's all of it makes sense. You know where everyone is positionally, and that's amazing for a movie that came out in 1977 to have the effects and as many effects as they have, and you know exactly where everyone is in the fight and exactly what their job is and where they're trying to get to. And when the Death Star explodes, it's so triumphant. Yeah. And the end of this movie is so triumphant. It makes you feel like no other movie gives you this feeling that Star Wars gives you. And it all started here, and it started with, for me, that Death Star exploding.
Yeah, so let's move on to some of the negatives that we might have had with this film. So, Brad, again, let's start with you.
I think that the lightsaber battle is pretty lame compared to the other lightsaber battles that we see. I chalk that up to budget and maybe the age of Alec Guinness. It's just not really a satisfying lightsaber battle. The result of it is satisfying and necessary with Obi-Wan disappearing and going to be with the Force and everything. It's great, but the actual battle itself is a little lacking. Not all of the costumes in the Mos Eisley Cantina look great. I know that they grabbed what they had for some of these costumes, but some of them stick out as being very rubber masky.
Yeah.
The CGI Jabba that we get in the special edition does not look good. It looks like worse than the episode 1 CGI Jabba does to me, and I'm not really into that. I get why the scene's there to establish Jabba as a character in the world, and you get to see Boba Fett standing next to him, which is cool, but the actual effect on Jabba himself, I'm not a fan of. And Luke is a little whiny bitch in this movie. Yes. I'm just gonna say it. He is very whiny and immature, and I think that's necessary for the character to have an arc from him, to see him grow as a character and as a person. But he is so whiny. I wanted to go to Tosche Station, get some power converters. Like, it's just not, it's not for me. Whenever he's in that kind of child mode and everything. It gets better as the movie goes on, but those are really the only complaints that I have with A New Hope.
Yeah, I have to echo your thoughts on Luke being a little bitch, dude. Like, he's just so whiny. He's just so annoying for the first half of this movie. I'm just like, I just need to get through it so I can get to badass Luke in Empire. Well, at the end of this movie, Empire and Return of the Jedi, because he does have a really good character arc. I mean, he grew up on a fucking desert planet. Like, he farms. He doesn't really do that much. He's a great pilot, which we get to see later on in the film. But at the beginning, I find him really, really annoying. I think the Obi-Wan Darth Vader fight is just the worst lightsaber fight possible. Even in the prequels with the lightsaber twirling, it looked and sounded cool, I guess, but nothing is as worse as this. It just looks so bad. The choreography, I think, is terrible, and then because, of course, he didn't have the visual effects when Vader cuts through Obi-Wan, and you can just see that it's a quick cut to where it's just like his robe falls. I'm like, yeah, it's whatever. You know, it's iconic for what it does for Star Wars, but taking it as what it is, I'm not really entertained by it at all. I don't think the additional CGI that George Lucas put in later on works at all, honestly. There's just very small aliens and other things that he just throws in there that I think is just distracting. Like, Blake, I see what you mean by just expanding the world and just getting more images of different types of aliens and stuff like that, but the CGI just doesn't work for me. I agree with you, Brad, with the whole Jabba thing. I don't think the CGI is that great, but that's really all the negatives that I had. It's very, very small things that just couldn't be helped at the time. So, Blake, I'm going to pass it off to you so I can get your negatives.
Yeah, I just think that the battle, just like y'all were saying, the battle between Obi-Wan and Vader, it's very anticlimactic for, especially you go back and watch the prequels sequels, and if you're watching all these movies all the way through 1 through 9, it's extremely anticlimactic to watch Vader and Anakin fight like that, and it ends like that. It's just weird. Luke is a whiny bitch, but I also think that Mark Hamill isn't a very good actor in this movie, and I don't think it's just like literally at the end of the movie when he comes back on the X-wing and he jumps off and he gives Leia a hug, he yells "Carrie!" Like he's I don't know, he's just not a very good actor. Like I don't really buy a lot of what he's saying, and even in like Return of the Jedi, there's some moments where I don't think he's super strong. Like he's a great Joker, and he's a good Luke Skywalker, but I just think in this movie he's just not a good actor.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with that, dude. It really is. I think the acting is definitely a part of it. And a lot of them, I mean, they didn't know what Star Wars was going to be, what it was going to become, you know what I mean? So, I mean, they're just doing their jobs, they're getting in their performances, and they didn't know what it was going to become. So, I'm kind of going to kick it off for my overall thoughts. I think one thing that we all touched on was the visual effects and just the production value of this movie in general. They built so many different models. The reason why all of this stuff looks so fucking great is because everything that you see is a live model, and what they did, they filmed these models in front of blue screen, and what they did with a lot of the movements, especially with like the Star Destroyers, is those models aren't moving. What's moving is the actual camera, and the way it's moving, it's simulating motion for a lot of these different things. I'm actually going to put in the podcast description a couple links to some behind the scenes stuff that I found that was just absolutely incredible for how they made this movie, and it is just absolutely amazing how A New Hope and everything that George Lucas and his team did changed cinema forever. So I want to pass it off to you guys and let me get your final thoughts on A New Hope.
I think A New Hope is one of the most necessary films of anyone who likes movies. Even if you're not into sci-fi, people agree that A New Hope is a fantastic film. It's, like I said, I have very minimal complaints with it. I think it's a near perfect movie, and it gave birth to one of the greatest franchises in movie history.
Yeah, it started it all, and I'm always going to be grateful to it for that, for what it did and how much this movie and the movies that followed fully impacted my life and the world.
Yeah, another thing that I want to touch on before we move on to Empire is that this movie is technically still the most profitable Star Wars movie, in my opinion, because they made this movie for $11 million and it made $774 million worldwide. Like, I think that's huge. It is definitely one of the most profitable films that they've ever made, and it's the first one out of the original trilogy. This is the one that made the most out of all of them. So it's just an incredible achievement. So let's get into The Empire Strikes Back, the film that everyone says, the film that everyone feels is the best Star Wars movie ever created. They made this one for $11 million, and this one made $547.8 million worldwide. Still incredibly popular and profitable, and this one was directed not by George Lucas, but by Irvin Kershner. He does an incredible job with this film. Brad, let me get your positives.
Literally everything about this movie. I think it is a perfect film. It is not just a perfect sci-fi film, just a perfect film, period. It has one of the most iconic scores of all time. Every single scene in this movie is interesting. There's not a moment of downtime. It's pretty much all action going on, whether it's character-driven action or actual like battles happening on screen. It is just and it happens immediately too, with Luke getting taken by the Wampa. Like it's right off the bat, you're dropped in, and there's no time wasted at all in this movie. The Battle of Hoth is my favorite large-scale Star Wars battle. It's amazing. It introduces us to the AT-ATs. It introduces us to the snow speeders, all of the amazing ships that we get to see in this movie. The whole sequence with them taking the AT-AT down with the cable is amazing. The introduction of Lando. Lando is one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars. Billy Dee Williams is amazing as Lando. The introduction of Yoda, it's like, come on, like, how can you argue with that? This movie gave us Yoda, which gave us Baby Yoda in The Mandalorian. So that's just thank you so much to Empire Strikes Back for that. All of Luke's training, especially the Force vision that he has with him fighting Vader and then seeing himself, is just amazing. The big reveal in the end that Vader is Luke's father is one of the most iconic twists in all of movie history. I can only imagine what it was like to be sitting in the theater and finding that out. It's crazy because, of course, as a kid, you hear the "I am your father" line growing up with our generation, and so it's that twist is kind of ruined for a lot of people. But it's still one of the greatest twists ever. I love that this movie ends on a down note. The heroes don't win in the end of this movie, and that's a really, really gutsy thing to do. The whole sequence with Han getting frozen in carbonite, the "I love you, I know," back and forth is just top-notch Star Wars. I could go on for hours about this movie, honestly, so I'm going to cut myself off because we don't want this to be a 3-hour podcast. But Empire Strikes Back is a perfect film, in my opinion. The cinematography, the pacing, the direction, the writing, all of it, I think, is just next level.
Yeah, I agree completely, dude. I also think this is a perfect film. Heads up, I don't actually have negatives for this film, so I'm gonna I'm gonna end up skipping that part because I think this film is just perfect. I mean, again, another great opening. This is the first time you get the Imperial March score, which is just absolutely incredible. This is where they introduce the Emperor for the first time. The Hoth battle. I mean, it's the Hoth battle. It's so fucking incredible. The first time you see the AT-ATs, the AT-STs, everything about that sequence is just incredible. When you look up the behind-the-scenes stuff and you see how they did it with, like, stop motion and a bunch of other stuff with, like, more models and all of this different stuff that they had to build and film, which makes everything looks so real. When you find out that there's so many things like A New Hope that are all like matte paintings, so many background stuff that looks so incredible, that looks so real. It's all just matte paintings with sets around it, and it just perfectly matches, and it just shows the level of care that was put into this film. The Millennium Falcon, I just love to see the Millennium Falcon in any movie. Watching Han go through the asteroid field, never tell me the odds. It's just such an incredible sequence. Again, when you find out how they did that, using models and all of these different things that they did to make these asteroids look real, and everything that they did there. Luke going to Dagobah and training with Yoda, and him learning the true ways of the Force, and him seeing himself in the Vader mask. I thought that was incredible. Spoilers, something similar happens in Rise of Skywalker, and I just think that this film is just incredible. There's nothing bad that I can say about this movie. Luke versus Vader, I thought that was an incredible fight. Like you already mentioned, Brad, the reveal that Vader is his father. I wish I was there in theaters to see this for the first time with audiences, because you know these days when you get big reveals in theaters, you can hear other people go like, what? You know, I wanted that experience in the theater, but it is what it is. Lando's amazing. Princess Leia's amazing. Everyone is great in this movie. Lando Calrissian is such an amazing character. Everything that we find out about him and Han, even though it's just a couple scenes and a couple lines of dialogue, you instantly get the history between these guys and how Han even got the Millennium Falcon in the first place. Fun fact about the Millennium Falcon almost looked like I can't remember exactly what the ship is called, but it's a different type of rebel ship. It's like a I can't remember what the name of it is, but the design was completely different. And the reason why they didn't go with that design was because there was a TV series that had a design very similar to that. So they had to completely change up the design, and George Lucas was like, well, what if we make it this shape? And the words he actually used was like, he wanted the ship to look like a squished hamburger. And the way they were able to make this new model within like 2 to 3 weeks is just absolutely incredible. Everything everything that they were able to do with this. Again, like you, Brad, I could talk about this movie for hours, for days. So Blake, I'm going to pass it off to you. Let me get your positives.
Yeah, so I'm basically just going to repeat everything you guys are saying. So, like, Han is awesome. Lando is super cool. Lando getting introduced is amazing. Billy D. Williams, I think he's the coolest character in all of Star Wars. Next to Palpatine, Lando's my favorite. Yeah. I love him so much. He is a character that betrays the heroes, sells them out to the bad guys, and you still fucking love him so much because he's so cool. The way he talks is amazing. He's so smooth, and every part of this movie is flawless. All of this is why we love Star Wars. It all comes back to this movie. It's the Hoth battle. It's Luke using the Force on his lightsaber to cut himself free from the Wampa. The fight between Luke and Vader. It's the best setting. I don't think it's the best fight choreography out of any fight, because I think that's in Phantom Menace at the Duel of the Fates. But I think the best setting for a fight is in the Luke and Vader fight whenever they're on Bespin. The way they figure out how to take down the AT-ATs in Hoth is so cool. It's such an awesome reveal that you feel like you're figuring it out with them, and you feel like you're along the ride with them. Luke training on Dagobah with Yoda is some of the best stuff in Star Wars, period. It has some of the best lines: do or do not, there is no try. The philosophy of the Force, and Yoda's just one of the greatest characters ever. This movie's perfect. Just like you were saying, I when we've been writing notes for this, I've been thinking all week, is there literally a single nitpick that I can possibly think of for this movie? And there's not. When I rack my brain, I watch it again, it's 100% flawless. It's one of the greatest movies ever made. There's not a single thing wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else to be said. Empire is just an amazing film. None of us have negatives. It really is. I've tried. I was looking for something just to name anything to be a negative, and I just can't. It would be bullshit, because this film is just amazing.
Yeah, and George Lucas knew that as well. That's why this one has almost nothing changed from it in the special edition. It's like barely anything. The only thing that's changed in it that's noticeable is on Bespin, you see like the clouds and everything and the cityscape in the background, but in the original version it's just like white out windows. There's no windows there, and I think that's a good addition to it, and that like barely affects anything. It's not like he's having huge characters walk right in front of the camera like he does in A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, you know?
Yeah. Dude, everything about this movie is incredible, and it leads into another great third movie in any trilogy, Star Wars Return of the Jedi. I love this movie. I jump back and forth a lot whether this is my favorite or Empire is my favorite. I can't land on one. I just don't know which one's my favorite, because I just think, and I'll get into it, but this one was made for $32 million. This one grossed $475 million worldwide, so it's still going down. This one was directed by Richard Marquand, written by Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas. This is another incredible film. There's just a few things that I did not like in this movie, but Brad, I'm going to start with you. Let's get some positives.
Cool. So everything in Jabba's palace is awesome. I love that sequence except for one particular part, which I'll get to in the negatives. It's an addition that got added to the movie that I have a problem with than Jabba's palace. But everything around that is great. I love Lando's introduction with the Gamorrean guard mask on and everything. Leia's rescue of Han is fantastic. You hear that ooh, 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 in the background, and it's just like, oh shit, what's going on? He knows he set up a trap for you. That whole battle that happens on the barge is great after Luke shows up. I hate that Boba Fett goes out the way that he does, because I'm such a Boba Fett fan, but it is what it is. There is a continuity error in this movie that I'm going to count as a positive, because it's become an inside joke within my family. But it's whenever on the barge, Han is still blind, and Chewie yells at him, and he says, "Boba Fett," and then it cuts to a different part, and then it cuts back to him, and it says, "Boba Fett? Where?" So I love that scene so much. Anytime Boba Fett's brought up, is Boba Fett. Boba Fett, where? I love everything that happens on the barge battle. I love the role that the Emperor plays in this movie, that it's much bigger than any of the other movies that we'd seen up to this point. That's just because he's the best. It's Palpatine is the best character in Star Wars. I go back and forth between him and Han. But I got after the saga is now complete, I gotta say that Palpatine is the number one character in Star Wars.
Radius.
I love Luke's return to Dagobah, even though it's heartbreaking that we lose Yoda. Whenever we get to Endor, the speeder bike chase scene is amazing. Like I said, that's like my earliest memory that I have is that speeder bike chase scene, so that will always be important to me. Another big reveal in this movie with Luke and Leia being twins. Like I can only imagine what that was like, especially for the people who just saw Empire Strikes Back and been like, wait, didn't she like make out with him in front of Han?
Yep.
But I guess we'll just move right past that. But Luke's final moments with Anakin are amazing, especially after seeing the prequels and knowing the journey that Anakin went on and seeing his journey complete is so satisfying. The lightsaber battle between him and Vader is one of the best in all of Star Wars, especially whenever the Emperor intervenes. It's one of the best moments. Luke calling out to him, "Father," and seeing Vader actually step up and renounce being Vader and becoming Anakin again is just so satisfying. And that's pretty much all the positives that I have about Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, Blake, I'm actually going to pass it off to you.
Okay, so my positives in this movie are everything that has to do with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor. I love their storylines, them together, Luke and Vader on the elevator riding up to the Emperor's throne room is one of my favorite images in all of Star Wars. Just knowing, especially if you watch the prequels and watching the two previous movies leading up to this, just knowing everything that led to these two standing in this elevator riding to the Emperor's throne room together. I love the opening in Jabba's palace, minus the bullshit song. I like the Rancor. I think that he's really cool. Speeder bike chases. The speeder bike chase is awesome. I really like the final scene in the Emperor's throne room and the dialogue back and forth between the Emperor and Luke about what the Force represents and what it can be and who the Jedi and the Sith are and all of this stuff. That's the highlight of this movie for me. But those are pretty much all my positive. This is not one of my favorite Star Wars movies.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
Oh man, I fucking love this movie. When Vader shows up on the new Death Star and you see the Emperor coming down off of the ship is just incredible. I love Ian McDiarmid so fucking much. He's so amazing in this movie, and anytime he shows up in any movie. The first 37 minutes of this movie is absolutely incredible. When Luke walks into Jabba's palace, one of my favorite scenes in this entire movie, it's so subtle. At 22 minutes and 10 seconds, it's where he walks into the palace, and at that entrance door, it rises up, and Luke walks in, and you just get the silhouette of him in this hood with the light behind it, and the door comes down. I think it's just fucking epic because you don't know who it is initially, and then when you see him walk into the actual palace for the first time, you see it's Luke. He's a completely changed person. He's calmer now. He is more in control of who he is. He's more in tune with the Force, and it's so apparent. I think Mark Hamill does such an incredible job with this sequence. The Sarlacc pit sequence is awesome. There's small little nitpicks that I have that I'll get into. With my negatives, we get the reveal of his new lightsaber that I think is really, really cool. I love the sequence on Endor, minus some things that I'll get into with my negatives, but everything with Palpatine, and like you said, Blake, everything with Palpatine, Vader, and Luke, it's just amazing. Everything in that throne room with Luke looking out that window, watching the rebels being destroyed, and he has a chance to save them if he turns to the dark side, but he knows it's the wrong thing. And I just love Ian McDiarmid's voice, what he's able to do with the Emperor in general. Mm-hmm. Strike me down, and your journey to the dark side would be complete. I just love him so fucking much. That entire battle, it's my favorite lightsaber battle out of any Star Wars movie. It's not the best, but it's my favorite because you just see the internal struggle between Luke and Vader. Luke is struggling, trying to hold on to the light while he's giving into his anger because Palpatine mentions, if you won't turn to the dark side, then maybe your sister will. And that's when he fucking flips and he just goes apeshit on Vader, cuts his arm off until he realizes, like, what he's done. You know what I mean? And again, on that flip side of Vader realizing he's fighting his son and watching Palpatine killing his son, and he makes that turn back into Anakin, like, it's just amazing. It proves that Luke really is the chosen one, because we learn later on Anakin wasn't the chosen one, Luke is the actual chosen one. And I love that. I love so many things about this movie. My negatives are small, but they're annoying, and we'll get into that. So Brad, I'm going to pass it off to you. Let me get your negatives.
So number one negative is the song in Jabba's Barge. It goes on for so long. It's ridiculous how long this song goes on for. And it's supposed to be played for laughs, I guess, because there's that whole thing where he's like holding the note and the spit is like dribbling off of his tooth and everything, and you're just like, when is this going to be over? And it's weird too, because it's like a music video, because at times she's singing directly to the camera too, which is
it's weird.
It's just a very, very strange sequence, and I don't understand why they did that, because there was a different song that played in the theatrical version that John Williams actually had his son, who was the lead singer of Toto, write the lyrics for. Found that out while I was doing some research on this. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool that they collaborated together on that. But that song doesn't exist anymore because it was replaced by the one in the special edition.
Yeah.
I'm going to get some hate for this. I don't like Ewoks. I think they're really cute, but I think that they take away from the mission and the story at hand that Han and Leia are doing while Luke is up on the Death Star. I think that some of the humor with the Ewoks doesn't land for me. Some of the sequences go on way too long with them. I'm not a huge fan of them thinking that 3PO is a god and everything. Like, it's just not for me. I think that I'm of the mind that the Ewoks look the way that they do to just sell toys because Lucas had 100% of the merchandising rights and everything. I think that it would have been better if they were actual, like, jungle dwelling people like the original concept for the Ewoks was, but instead we get teddy bears with spears and rocks. So I'm not a big fan of that part of the movie. Those are really my only complaints with it, but unfortunately the Ewoks take up a big chunk of the second half of this movie. So that's why this one ranks towards the middle of my overall Star Wars ranking.
Okay, Blake, I'm going to pass it off to you because I am curious to hear your negatives on this one.
Yeah, so for me, the Leia, Han, and Chewie storyline in this movie is so inconsequential, and what they're doing is just seems unimportant and like a distraction to the story that we're going through. I don't like what they do with Leia in this movie at all. I feel like Leia in the first two was such a badass character that stood up to Vader and was a leader in the rebellion and all of this stuff. She was a badass. And in this movie, she's almost like a sex object in the first part of it, and then in the second half of the movie she's just like this weird mothering figure to these Ewoks, and it's just like the character of Leia is totally like pushed aside for me in this movie. Like, it doesn't follow the way that the character of Leia would progress at all, even going into Force Awakens and all that. It just, she's badass in those movies, so this movie is just a weird sidestep where I don't think she does anything badass in it at all. I think that anytime it takes you away from Luke and Vader and the Emperor, it's also uninteresting to me. I think that the way Boba Fett goes out is stupid. The song, like you were saying, it just keeps going and going. It's a terrible song.
It's
bullshit.
You don't like that, Blake?
C-3PO being worshipped like a god. It's just this weird, like, none of it feels like Jar Jar Gungan stuff to me, like from in Phantom Menace. It just, like, it's that, and for me the biggest offense that this movie does is it takes away from how badass Leia was, because she was so cool in those first two and has nothing badass to do. She falls off of a speeder bike and then like cuddles with bears for a while, and this is after being in a bikini for no real apparent reason.
I hear everything you're saying, dude, and being honest, all of my negatives are exactly the same as your negatives. My number one negative is the singing sequence in Jabba's palace. It's so, like, it doesn't make any sense for it to be in this movie. It's really, really distracting. I hate the fact that Boba Fett goes up like a complete bitch. Like, it's so ridiculous. It's like you didn't earn that Mandalorian armor. You didn't earn it. You're just a waste. They took this cool character and they just absolutely fucking ruined it. It's like, did you not know what you had with this incredible character? It could have been anyone that fell into that pit. Why did it have to be Boba Fett? I think it's so fucking stupid. I fucking hate the Ewoks. I am not a fan of the Ewoks. They're really distracting. Like you said, they're just fucking teddy bears to sell toys. This is where the film slows down. Everything that has to do with the Ewoks is really annoying to me. I don't like the sequence with them worshipping C-3PO. I think it's fucking stupid. It doesn't work for me at all. That's pretty much my biggest issues with the movie. The Slave Leia stuff, like, it bothers me because it takes away from how strong and how much of a leader and a badass we see Leia as. But at the same time, when you look at it in context, it doesn't bother me that much because that's what someone like Jabba would do. They would take someone that they see is really, really hot and they objectify them to take away anything from them. It works for me narratively, but I do roll my eyes when I see it in the film. It's just like, this is just ridiculous. This is just so that viewers can just look at Carrie Fisher half naked. You know, it's distracting at points. Yeah, it's just distracting at some points, but narratively it makes sense. He's trying to dehumanize her, someone who is a princess. He's trying to dehumanize her and take away all of that bravery and everything that we've seen before. So again, narratively it makes sense, but it's just so annoying after everything that you've seen that she's done so badassly. That's not even a word, but everything that she's done in those other movies. So we've talked about all four of these movies. I want to know your final overall thoughts on these four movies collectively.
I would, like I said before, I wouldn't be into movies or even on this podcast if it wasn't for these three movies and then the fourth one that we got later on. It's probably the most influential movie trilogy for me, over Lord of the Rings, over Indiana Jones. Although Indiana Jones is a very close second, minus Kingdom of the fucking Crystal Skull. Goddamn. Ugh, I just got sick thinking about that movie. But I think that the original trilogy is the ultimate movie trilogy. It's the ultimate story arc that goes from even without all of the other movies. The story arc between these three films is so awesome and so compelling, and the fact that we have two other trilogies to add on to it to make it even more epic is that much more awesome, regardless of how far off target some of those other movies ended up being, in my opinion. But this original trilogy is easily one of my favorites in all of film, and I wouldn't be who I was today if it wasn't for these movies.
Yeah, Blake, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, overall as a trilogy, even though I don't love Return of the Jedi. Sorry, that's a reaction. Did you notice that? Yeah. It's an involuntary reaction that when I say I don't like, it just followed by The Last Jedi. Anyway, so even though I don't love Return of the Jedi all that much, it's still, these three movies are one of the best trilogies ever made. They're some of the most important movies that have ever been made. Like I said, half of my clothes are Star Wars related, so I wouldn't be wearing clothes if it wasn't for Star Wars. I wouldn't be recording a podcast if it wasn't for that. It's Star Wars. It's how I have friends. Like that's how you made friends growing up. It's like I was a nerdy, weird, homeschooled kid. The way I made friends was playing lightsaber battles with people. Like it's everything to me. It's Star Wars.
Yeah, I love these movies so much. I think this is a very tight trilogy. It's an amazing trilogy. It's my second favorite trilogy of all time. I still think the original Lord of the Rings trilogy is just leaps and bounds better than this trilogy as a whole. That's just me, but I fucking love Star Wars. Everything that I love about sci-fi comes from Star Wars originally. One of my first games, like I mentioned before, was Rogue Squadron. I owe Star Wars so much. Everything that I love about diving into what it takes to make a film and what goes into production and CGI, it all stems from this, because again, Star Wars changed cinema forever. There's so many people, when you listen to them in interviews, why did you become an actor? Why did you become a director? Why did you want to make props, do everything that goes into making a film? It's because of Star Wars. It always amazes me when I watch those interviews. It's like, yeah, that's what got me into everything that I'm into now, just fandom in general, or just nerding out about all of these different things. Like, it all stems from Star Wars. There's comics that I love. Again, the games. Star Wars is just rooted in everything. I remember when I was a kid playing with those Star Wars toys and just having the time of my fucking life. Everything. I just love Star Wars so much. And I can't wait to talk about the Disney trilogy, because I have so many fucking thoughts about those movies. Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker. There's so many great things I have to say. There's so many negative things that I have to say, and that's going to be a really fun episode. So I hope you guys tune in for that episode. Brad, Blake, thank you guys so much for joining me on this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's always a joy to speak about Star Wars.
Yeah, anytime we get to talk about Star Wars, man.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can follow me all over social media at C4Spoilers. Head over to kefoforspoilers.com, where you can actually find my written review of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. You can also find other articles there in the world of movies, TV shows, anime, gaming. You can also find links to all of the podcasts on the Kevo for Spoilers podcast network, including the You've Gotta See This podcast. This next episode is going to be sick. Brad and Blake are going to be talking about 6 underground Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker and 2 other films that you guys are going to have to tune in to see them talk about. So again, guys, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you guys next time.